wind in Deadwood in the spring of 1855 was a liar, promising warmth while whipping grit into the face of anyone foolish enough to believe it. Elias Thorne, a man whose shoulders had begun to slope under the weight of his failing farm, stared at the sun-baked soil. It wasn't just dirt, it was a hungry mouth demanding more than he could give. His small homestead, 3 days' harsh ride outside the main settlement, was a monument to his misplaced hope. He had traded the promise of fertile lands back east for this unforgiving, arid stretch, and now the drought was strangling him. Elias's anxiety wasn't the kind that made a man pace. It was a cold internal knot that made his movements slow and deliberate. His wife, Sarah, had a look of quiet, resigned fear that mirrored his own. But it was their son, Silas, a bright-eyed boy of 7, who was Elias's true north and his deepest sorrow. Silas's laughter, thin but persistent, was the only thing keeping the encroaching darkness at bay. The debt was to Mr. Horatio Finch, a man as dry and unyielding as the land itself, whose influence stretched like barbed wire across the territory. Finch owned the bank, the general store, and soon, if Elias didn't pay the mounting interest, he would own the Thorne farm too. The final payment was due in 10 days. Elias had nothing left to sell, no livestock, no reserves, only the hollow walls of his ambition. That morning Finch rode out, a shadow against the blazing sunrise, accompanied by 2 hired hands with eyes like flint. He didn't dismount. 10 days, Thorne. Finch's voice was a low, sandpapery rasp. The principle and the interest, all of it. Don't come to me with talk of mercy. I deal in property, not piety. Elias swallowed, the grit in his throat making the action painful. I'm working on it, Finch. Just need a few more weeks for a shipment to arrive. A blatant lie, but the only defense he had. Finch smiled, a skeletal tightening of the lips. He glanced at Silas, who was clutching a whittled wooden horse near the porch. That boy of yours, always staring, isn't he? Got a pair of eyes on him. Brightest blue I've seen this side of the Mississippi. The comment was unsettling, irrelevant, and Finch rode off without another word, leaving a cloud of dust and an even heavier pall of dread. Later that evening, the tension in the small cabin was suffocating. Sarah was patching a tear in Elias's worn work shirt, her needle movements jerky. Elias, what did he say? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elias sat at the rough-hewn table, tracing the wood grain with a calloused finger. The usual, 10 days. He couldn't meet her eyes. I rode to Widow Jenkins. She won't lend. Said Finch has her by the throat, too. Sarah dropped the shirt. We lose the farm, we lose everything. We'll be squatters, Elias. What about Silas? I know. Elias slammed his fist on the table, the unusual outburst making Silas jump in the corner. I'm trying. I've been to every damned soul who owes me, every merchant in town. They all say the same. The drought's got them, or Finch has them. The idea that would later haunt Elias like a physical phantom came not as a grand, wicked plan, but as a small, desperate thought, birthed from fear and the harsh necessity of survival. It began with Finch's casual comment about Silas's eyes. 2 days later, Elias heard a rumor in Deadwood. A traveling doctor, a man named Dr. Silas Keller, was setting up a temporary practice in a secluded rented room above the defunct livery stable. Keller was eccentric, secretive, and reputedly wealthy, dealing in specialized services for those with unique needs and the means to pay for discretion. The whispers were vague, but the money being exchanged was rumored to be substantial. Elias dismissed it initially as saloon gossip. But the next night, unable to sleep, Elias found himself staring at Silas, peaceful in his cot, his eyelashes casting delicate shadows on his cheeks. Elias remembered the sheer, terrifying amount of money Finch demanded, an amount only a desperate, clandestine deal could secure. He thought of the land, the only life they knew, the unforgiving alternative of destitution. The knot in his stomach tightened into a spike of sheer panic. The following morning, Elias packed a small pouch of supplies. "Where are you going?" Sarah asked, her expression already reading the desperation in his face. "Back to Deadwood," he lied. "Going to try the miners' camp one last time. See if I can strike a deal for next season's yield. Be careful, Elias, please." He kissed her, a brief, dry press of the lips. He did not kiss Silas. He couldn't. He rode toward the main settlement, but instead of the miners' camp, he found the livery stable. The door to the upstairs room was heavy, unmarked, and smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic, something like fear. He knocked once, the sound echoing hollowly in the otherwise silent street. The door opened to reveal a tall man with spectacles and a severe, unreadable expression. "Dr. Silas Keller." "I need to talk to you," Elias stated, his voice raw. Dr. Keller's eyes, magnified behind the thick lenses, scanned Elias from his dusty boots to his desperate eyes. "Discretion is paramount here, Mr. Thorne, and the cost is high. I have something unique," Elias whispered, the words tasting of ash. "Something of immense value. Something like those blue eyes," Finch noticed. Dr. Keller did not react. He merely stepped aside, opening the door wider. The room was sparse, surgical, and terrifyingly efficient. "Come in, Mr. Thorne," Keller said, his voice completely devoid of judgment, which somehow made it worse. "Let's discuss this unique value. Do try to be specific." Elias took a deep, shuddering breath, the smell of antiseptic filling his lungs. He was crossing a line, not just of morality, but of sanity. The land, the farm, their survival, all balanced against an unspeakable sacrifice. The silence in the room was absolute, pressing down on him, forcing the horrifying words from his mouth. He was about to sell his soul to the devil of necessity. The man before him, with his sterile room and calm demeanor, was simply the transaction point. Elias focused on the image of Sarah's tear-streaked face if they were forced off the land, the shame of destitution, the cold of the streets. It was the only way he could rationalize the monstrous request he was about to make. He could feel the cold sweat prickling his forehead under the pressure of this moment. He was sacrificing one part of his son to save the rest of his son's life and his family's future. The justification was a flimsy shield against the knowledge of his own wickedness, yet it was all he had. The air was thick, suffocating with the unspoken horror. Dr. Keller listened with the detached patience of a man who had heard all forms of human desperation. Elias explained the debt, the drought, the farm's value, and finally, the unspeakable proposition, cloaking the act in language of medical necessity and a rare donor need. He spoke of an accident that would be required, a story of an unfortunate event that would necessitate the removal of the eyes. The money Elias named, the exact amount of Finch's debt plus a small margin for supplies, was astronomical for Deadwood in 1855. When Elias finished, the only sound was the distant clatter of wagon wheels from the street below. Keller leaned forward, the light glinting off his spectacles. He didn't question the morality. He questioned the logistics. "The blue is rare," Keller admitted, his voice low and clinical. "The youth and the implied vitality raises the value considerably. But, Mr. Thorne, this procedure, the risk of detection is high. Even with an established narrative of an accident, a boy's trauma." He paused, his gaze fixed on Elias. "The narrative must be flawless, and the boy must be brought here in secret. The procedure requires absolute sterility and time. The accident must happen naturally, near an isolated point, and you must have transport. How will you explain his blindness, should you succeed?" Elias's plan, hatched in the terror of sleepless nights, was brutal in its simplicity. "We'll say a rattlesnake strike, blinded by venom. It's common enough on the outskirts. Sarah will believe it too if I make the symptoms convincing enough." She won't question the doctor's involvement if she thinks it's the only way to save his life from the poison. The lie was already twisting itself into the shape of truth in his mind. Keller nodded, making a calculation on a small pad of paper. The risk is acceptable for the value. The funds will be transferred to a holding account under your name, accessible only after the completion of the service and the boy's safe recovery. Full payment upon my successful departure from Deadwood. Half of the required amount will be released tomorrow in cash to settle your immediate problem with Mr. Finch. I trust this arrangement is sufficient, Mr. Thorne. Elias felt a wave of dizzying relief and profound self-loathing wash over him. The weight of the debt was lifting, replaced by the crushing weight of his sin. "It is," he rasped. "When?" "Tomorrow night. The moon will be new. Bring him to the deserted smithy 1 mile south of the settlement. Midnight. Bring him under the pretense of a remedy. Something involving a poultice that needs to be prepared in secret. Make sure his mother is distracted, completely removed from the process. Any complication, any sign of second thoughts, and the deal is void, and the cash you'll receive tomorrow will be considered payment for my consultation and time. Do we have an agreement, Mr. Thorne?" "Yes." The single word tasted metallic, like the coppery tang of blood. Elias returned home that afternoon, a saddlebag heavy with the first installment of the money. He felt like a ghost riding back to his own life. He settled the immediate, most pressing part of the debt with Finch the following morning, paying him with a practiced casualness that hid the screaming inside his head. Finch was surprised but merely pocketed the cash, a cold, calculating look in his eyes. "Good, Thorne. The final installment in 8 days. Don't be late." The lie to Sarah was the hardest part. That evening, after a tense, quiet dinner, Elias announced his plan. "I met an herbalist, a good one, near the smithy. He has a secret treatment for the farm's soil, a poultice that needs to be infused under the new moon. It requires a young touch, a boy's hands, for the magic to work. Silas has to come with me tonight." Sarah looked weary but hopeful. "An herbalist? That sounds strange, Elias. Can't we just pay for fertilizer?" "No, Sarah, this is different," Elias insisted, forcing conviction into his voice. "This is old-world knowledge. It's the only chance we have of bringing this land back to life before next season. It'll only take a few hours. I need you to stay here. Boil this water for the morning and keep the fire low. Don't leave the house." Silas, excited by the secret mission and the chance to help his father, eagerly put on his coat. Elias watched his son's innocent excitement, and the internal spike of panic returned, sharper than before. He was using his son's trust as a tool for his betrayal. As they rode out, the air was still and cold. Elias couldn't look at Silas, who was chattering excitedly about the soil magic. "Is the herbalist a wizard, Papa?" Silas asked, his voice filled with wonder. Elias almost choked on the reply. "No, son. Just a very smart man who knows the earth better than anyone." They reached the abandoned smithy. It was a dilapidated stone structure, dark and foreboding under the new moon's cover. Dr. Keller's carriage, small and black, was already parked out of sight behind the building. "Stay right here, Silas," Elias instructed, his hands shaking as he helped the boy dismount. "The man is inside. He's very focused. You go in first. I need to secure the horses." Silas, clutching his whittled horse, walked into the smithy, his small figure swallowed by the darkness. Elias didn't watch him go. He secured the horses, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. He walked slowly toward the smithy door, every step a betrayal. Just as he reached the entrance, he heard a muffled cry from within, not a shout of pain, but a gasp of confusion, quickly silenced. Elias stopped dead, the lie shattering in his ears. He was about to walk into the worst moment of his life. He pushed the door open, the sight inside freezing the blood in his veins. Silas was struggling, but he wasn't screaming. Keller was ready, the room dimly lit by an oil lamp. Elias's reflection in the glass of the lamp was unrecognizable, a monster in a father's coat. The chilling efficiency of Keller's preparations was the final blow to Elias's conscience. He knew at that moment that he had gone too far, but the path back was already destroyed. The heavy, damp air of the smithy seemed to weigh down on him, a tangible reminder of the moral filth he was now wading through. The deed was about to be done, and the silence from the boy was the most terrifying sound of all. The operation, if it could be called that, was a brutal symphony of efficiency and silence. Dr. Keller worked with unnerving speed, his movements precise and sterile, his face a blank mask of concentration. Elias stood frozen by the entrance, a witness to his own self-destruction. The procedure was swift, the boy's initial cry of confusion, quickly muffled by a cloth soaked in a sweet-smelling concoction, was the last sound of protest. Elias saw the sudden, terrifying slackness in his son's body, the rapid, methodical work of Keller, and then the final, dreadful sight. The small blue marbles of light, now detached, placed carefully into a preservation container. The sight did not look like surgery. It looked like a calculated cold extraction. "It is done," Keller stated, wiping his hands on a clean cloth. He spoke with the simple finality of a butcher finishing a cut. "The boy will wake. He must be kept calm. The story of the rattlesnake venom must be absolute, Mr. Thorne. Severe swelling, the loss of sight. He will need time to recover. Give him this laudanum solution for the pain, sparingly. Now, take him. Your payment is complete, Mr. Thorne. I will arrange my departure before dawn." Keller handed Elias a sealed metal box containing the remainder of the agreed-upon sum. Enough money to secure the farm and live modestly for years. Elias, numb with shock and horror, gently lifted his son. Silas was limp, his small body feeling impossibly light and fragile. He wrapped him in a blanket, trying not to look at the bandages Keller had meticulously applied. The weight of the metal box in his hand was leaden, a constant sickening reminder of the price paid. The ride home was an agonizing blur. Elias held Silas close, navigating the dark, rough trail. His mind raced, constructing and reconstructing the lie, solidifying the snake venom story until it was the only reality he could grasp. He arrived back at the cabin just before the first streak of dawn, the sky turning a bruised purple. Sarah rushed out, panic already etched on her face. "Elias, what happened? Where's Silas?" "A snake, Sarah. A rattlesnake near the smithy," Elias yelled, the fabricated panic in his voice sounding terrifyingly real. "He was bitten, right near his face. The herbalist, he wasn't an herbalist, he was a doctor, thank God. He saved his life, but the venom." He laid Silas gently on the cot. Sarah gasped, falling to her knees beside the boy. She saw the heavy bandages covering her son's eyes, the pale, still face. "Oh my God, Silas. What did it do to him?" "The venom blinded him, Sarah," Elias whispered, letting the horror of the supposed accident wash over her. "The doctor said it's permanent. The venom was too strong, too fast. He saved his life by draining the poison, but the eyes... The damage is permanent. We have the farm, Sarah. We're safe. But Silas, he can't see." Sarah's grief was immediate and visceral. She wailed, a sound of raw animal pain that ripped through the small cabin. She held Silas's hand, kissing his forehead, rocking gently back and forth. Her focus was entirely on the boy, the tragedy of the supposed snakebite eclipsing all else. Elias watched her, a knot of guilt tightening in his chest until he could barely breathe. The lie had worked perfectly. Sarah was too consumed by the immediate devastating loss of Silas's sight to question the circumstances, the timely appearance of a skilled doctor, or the sudden, secure funding they now possessed. When Silas finally woke hours later, he was confused and scared. The laudanum had dulled the pain, but the disorientation was profound. "Papa? Mama? Why is it so dark?" Is the magic finished? His small voice was weak, laced with fear. Sarah immediately took control, her maternal instinct overriding her shock. No, my darling, you've been very brave. A nasty snake bit you, but Mama is here. You can't see right now, but you're safe, my love. We're safe. Elias watched them. The farm debt paid off, the deed to the land secure in his pocket, yet he felt utterly bankrupt. The cabin was warm, the family was together, but the silence from the boy was a constant, haunting accusation. He had bought their physical survival at the cost of his son's sight and his own soul. The following weeks were a blur of adjustment. Sarah was a pillar of strength, tending to Silas with tireless devotion, teaching him to navigate the small cabin by touch, reading to him by the dim light. She never questioned Elias, accepting the snakebite story as a cruel, random act of nature. Elias, however, began to unravel. He started sleeping in the barn, claiming he needed to watch the livestock he had bought back with Keller's money. He couldn't bear to hear Silas's quiet, sightless movements, couldn't endure Sarah's loving, unquestioning presence. His days were spent working the revitalized soil, trying to sweat out the guilt, but the earth offered no solace. Every time he picked up a tool, he felt the heavy weight of the metal box again. The money had become cursed, tainting everything it touched. One afternoon, a week after the incident, Elias found Silas sitting on the porch, running his fingers over the railing. "Papa?" Silas asked, his voice subdued. "Why does Mama cry when she thinks I'm sleeping?" "She's just sad about the snake, son," Elias mumbled, turning away to hide his face. "I don't think so, Papa. It's a different sad. It's a quiet one. And sometimes, when you think I can't hear you in the barn, you make a quiet sad too." Elias froze. The terror was not in the boy's loss of sight, but in his newfound, terrifying clarity of hearing and feeling. "The snake didn't just bite me, Papa," Silas continued, running his hand over his bandaged eyes. "I remember the smell in that room. Not the outside smell. A clean, sharp smell. And I remember the man's voice. He wasn't scared of the snake. He was waiting for me." The blood drained from Elias's face. The lie was not as solid as he thought. The boy remembered. Silas's quiet revelation shattered Elias's precarious sanity. The boy wasn't just adjusting to blindness, he was recalling the moments leading up to his trauma. The clean, sharp smell, the antiseptic of Keller's surgical room, and the doctor's detached voice, waiting. Elias realized the depth of his error. He hadn't just taken his son's sight. He had left a terrifying, abstract memory lodged in his mind, a silent piece of evidence that contradicted the snakebite narrative. Elias's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would pace the cabin at night, his boots thudding on the floorboards, sometimes stopping abruptly to stare at Silas, looking for a sign, a flicker of doubt, an accusation. The farm, meant to be his salvation, now felt like a gilded cage built on a foundation of betrayal. The thriving crops were a mocking testament to his wickedness. Sarah, preoccupied with Silas's care, noticed Elias's withdrawal, but attributed it to the trauma of the accident and the responsibility of the debt. "Elias, you need rest. It's over. The farm is safe. Silas will learn to manage," she'd say, her words filled with a resolute strength he no longer possessed. He couldn't tell her. The truth would not only destroy their family, but would likely lead to his imprisonment or, worse, a mob's justice. He was trapped by the lie, forced to live out the role of the devoted, heartbroken father while a monster clawed its way out of his own skin. His paranoia began to focus on Finch. Elias had settled the debt, but the man had looked at him strangely, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes when he took the money. Finch was known to be keenly aware of the local economy and the poverty of his debtors. How could Elias, who had nothing a week prior, suddenly produce such a significant sum of cash? Driven by a desperate need for confirmation, Elias rode into Deadwood under the cover of a cloudy day. He went to the livery stable. Doctor. Keller's room was now empty, the window dark, the heavy door locked. The smell of antiseptic was gone, replaced by the mundane smell of straw and manure. Keller had vanished completely, leaving no trace. Elias almost felt relieved, but the brief moment of peace was shattered when he saw a familiar, squat figure across the street, watching him from the shadows of the general store awning. Horatio Finch. Finch didn't approach. He simply stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes narrowed, following Elias's every move. Elias pretended to be looking for a harness repair and quickly rode away, the cold knot of dread returning to his stomach. Finch knew something. Elias returned to the farm, gripped by the fear of exposure. The land he had fought to save now felt like a battlefield, and the enemy was closer than he thought. That evening, as Sarah was bathing Silas, she made an unsettling discovery. She called Elias into the kitchen, her voice tight with confusion. "Elias!" She held out the tattered, soiled shirt Silas had been wearing the night of the supposed snakebite. "Look at this." The doctor said the snake struck near his face, but the venom would have caused burning, searing pain. There would have been blood, tissue damage, tearing of the fabric from the thrashing. She held up the shirt collar. "There's no blood, no tear, no scorch marks from a caustic venom. Nothing. Look at the stitching on the bandage itself. It's too neat, too organized for a rushed emergency procedure in a smithy." Elias felt his stomach drop out. He had only seen the outside of the lie. Sarah had studied the details up close. "It was dark, Sarah. The doctor was fast. He was saving our son's life." Elias's voice was too loud, too defensive, cracking under the strain. Sarah stepped back, her eyes narrowing, not in anger but in cold, reasoned suspicion. "A snakebite, Elias, is chaos. This looks like a planned procedure. And what about the money, Elias? Where did it come from? You told me you were going to the miners, but the money appeared the very next day, enough to pay Finch in full." The air in the cabin became brittle, electrified by the sudden, terrifying proximity of the truth. Elias knew he couldn't maintain the lie any longer without completely fracturing Sarah's trust. But he couldn't tell her the truth either. "I borrowed it from a man in town. A private deal. He wanted it kept secret to avoid Finch's notice," Elias stammered, his mind desperately grasping for a semi-believable narrative. "He's a merchant. I sold him the rights to next year's entire wheat crop." Sarah stared at him, her gaze unflinching, searching for the fissure in his story. The man was a doctor, Elias. Silas remembered the smell of a clean, sharp room. He remembered the man waiting for him. "You lied about the herbalist. You lied about the money. Now tell me the real lie, Elias. What exactly did you trade to save this farm?" The silence that followed was immense, a heavy, suffocating pressure that seemed to squeeze the air from the small room. Elias looked at the bandages on his son, then at the furious, betrayed intelligence in his wife's eyes. And he knew. He was ruined. He had saved their land only to destroy their life. The farm was secure, but the foundation of his family was crumbling into the cursed soil. He realized the most terrifying aspect of the situation. Keller was gone. Finch was suspicious. And now his only ally, Sarah, was staring at him like he was a stranger, a dangerous entity she no longer recognized. The suspense had become an intimate psychological torture. He felt the need to flee, but the walls of the cabin, purchased with his monstrous trade, held him prisoner. The fragile peace of the Thorne family was utterly shattered. Sarah's suspicion, born from the simple lack of blood on a shirt, had morphed into a chilling certainty of Elias's betrayal. She didn't press for the full truth, perhaps instinctively recoiling from the monstrous nature of it, but the knowledge of his deceit was a physical wall between them. They continued to live in the small cabin, tending to Silas, but the warmth of their life was extinguished, replaced by a cold, dreadful silence. Sarah began to conduct her own investigation, quiet and meticulous, fueled by maternal fury. She never left Silas alone, her presence a constant, silent accusation against Elias. She took her son into Deadwood, claiming he needed a tonic from the general store, Finch's store. While Elias worked the fields, haunted by the specter of his crime, Sarah spoke to Martha Elkins, the nervous, gossipy woman who ran the counter. Sarah casually mentioned the snake bite, fishing for information about the supposed doctor. Martha remembered the stir caused by Dr. Keller. "Oh, that strange doctor," Martha whispered, leaning in. "He rented the room above the livery for just a few days. Very private. Paid in cash, very clean money. And he left just as fast. The strangest thing, Mrs. Thorne, was who came to see him." Sarah's heart pounded. "Who, Martha?" "Old Mr. Gable, the one-legged prospector, and a few others. All men of means, or men of sudden desperation, bringing packages wrapped in thick cloth." Martha lowered her voice further. "And then, there was Mr. Finch. He went up there twice, stayed for a long time. They say Finch knows everything that happens in Deadwood, but that doctor was the only thing he looked genuinely interested in. Finch, the connection was clear. Finch, who had commented on Silas's bright eyes, who was deeply suspicious of Elias's sudden wealth, and who had visited the secretive doctor. Sarah realized this was not just a debt, but a conspiracy. Elias hadn't just chosen the monstrous path, he might have been subtly directed toward it. She returned to the farm, her composure icy. That evening she confronted Elias, but not with an emotional outburst. She approached him with the cold, hard precision of a lawyer. "Finch visited the Dr. Elias," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "The doctor who gave you the money for the farm. Finch knew about Keller, and Keller knew about Finch's debt collection. Did Finch tell you about the Dr. Elias? Did he plant the idea? He made a comment about Silas's eyes the day he demanded the payment." Elias sank onto a stool, the weight of the new revelation crushing him. I don't know," he stammered. "He just made a comment. It was me, Sarah. I made the deal. He didn't force me." "But he directed you," Sarah countered, her eyes burning with a terrible realization. "Finch is a master manipulator. He knew you were desperate. He knew Keller was looking for something specific. He orchestrated the temptation, Elias. He didn't hold the scalpel, but he set the stage." The terror deepened for Elias. He hadn't just sold his son's sight. He had been a manipulated pawn in a larger, darker game. Finch's interest wasn't in the farm, it was in the rare, valuable commodity Elias possessed, a commodity that would satisfy Kellar's mysterious needs. But why? Finch was wealthy. Why involve himself in a transaction this dangerous? The mystery now revolved around Horatio Finch and the true purpose of Dr. Keller's secretive clientele. Elias had to know the truth about Finch. He couldn't live under the shadow of a man who held the key to his absolute ruin. He needed to find a weakness, a secret, anything that could give him leverage against the man who had, inadvertently or deliberately, pushed him toward the unthinkable act. He rode back to Deadwood. Instead of the bank or the store, he focused on Finch's private, imposing residence on the edge of town. He crept through the yard, under a moonless sky, moving with the practiced stealth of a desperate man. He didn't find anything in the main house, just opulence and cold order. But he noticed a small separate structure in the back, a neglected tool shed, oddly secured with a heavy modern lock. It felt wrong, too heavily protected for common tools. Elias broke the lock, his heart hammering against his ribs. The shed was small, dusty, and held little inside, an old trunk, some discarded lumber. But Elias saw an indentation on the floor, a disturbance in the dirt and straw. He moved the trunk and found a set of narrow steps leading down into the earth. He lit a small match, shielding the flame with his hand, and descended. The air below was dry and cold, carrying a faint scent of chemicals and old paper. The small cellar room was lined with shelves, not of preserves, but of ledgers, old maps, and sealed boxes. This was Finch's true vault, his secret history. Elias snatched the nearest ledger, recognizing the date on the spine, 1853. He flipped it open. It wasn't a bank ledger. It was a record of names, property holdings, and chillingly, physical descriptions of the debtors and their children. Beside the name Thorne, a brief notation sent a cold shock through him. Son Silas, remarkable pale blue clear iris, high value. Elias dropped the ledger. Finch hadn't just noticed Silas's eyes, he had documented them. The man had been tracking his debtors' assets, not just their land and cattle, but their children's unique physical characteristics. Finch was not just a debt collector. He was an intermediary, a dealer in human despair, preparing a horrific inventory for men like Dr. Keller. Elias had been pre-selected. He quickly scanned another section of the ledger, a list of transactions far outside the bank's records, dated just before Keller's arrival. It detailed the transfer of significant funds to Finch from a group known only by the cryptic initials, the Collective. Below the entry was another chilling note. Requirement: specific optical material for medical application. Rare specimen secured by Finch. Elias stumbled back, the match sputtering out, plunging him into darkness. He wasn't a desperate father who made a bad choice. He was the targeted victim of a sinister, organized trade. He had played exactly the role assigned to him. The realization was a far deeper terror than the mere act of betrayal. He had saved his farm by enabling a vast, unknown horror. The weight of his guilt was now compounded by the dread of a powerful, unseen enemy, the Collective that had just used him. He had to get out, but he couldn't leave the evidence behind. He had to expose Finch, not just to save himself, but to stop whatever sinister trade he was facilitating. He grabbed the ledger and a handful of supporting documents. The silence of the cellar was broken only by the frantic sound of his own breath. He was no longer just running from his guilt, but from a powerful, unseen organization. Elias rode back to the farm, the damning ledger clutched under his arm. The documents contained not only the specific notation regarding Silas, but also details of other assets Finch had identified. A girl with a rare blood type, a young man with a unique skeletal structure. Finch was systematically cataloging and exploiting the vulnerabilities of his debtors, trading in human parts under the guise of medical application for the Collective. Elias presented the evidence to Sarah, not with a plea for forgiveness, but with a desperate need for a witness. He spread the papers across the table. Sarah read the notation about Silas, her face draining of color, then hardened into a mask of pure, protective rage. He targeted us, Elias. He made sure you knew about Keller, made sure you were desperate enough, she said, her voice shaking but firm. This farm is paid for with more than Silas's sight. It's paid for with the lives and suffering of others Finch intended to exploit. We can't keep it. We have to expose him. The focus shifted from their personal tragedy to a common, external enemy. Sarah, finally understanding the scope of the conspiracy, channeled her pain into an immediate, fierce determination. The psychological terror had now become a tangible physical threat. We take this to the sheriff, Elias, Sarah insisted. No, Elias countered, shaking his head. Finch owns the sheriff. He owns the judge. He owns Deadwood. If we go to them, we're arrested. The ledger is destroyed, and the Collective finds out we know their operation. We have to go outside Deadwood. We have to go to the territorial governor or a bigger newspaper in St. Louis. They agreed to flee. They would prepare their departure in secret, leaving nothing behind to suggest their destination. Their immediate priority was Silas. They had to leave him with a believable cover story. That night, they began the preparations. Sarah sewed the ledger and documents into the lining of Elias's coat. Elias packed the barest necessities, securing the remaining Keller cash, the cursed money, for the journey. But Finch, a man who never missed a detail, had already sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The missing lock on his tool shed, the disturbed earth in the cellar. He didn't need to check the ledger to know he had been compromised. He knew Elias was the only person desperate and guilty enough to break in. The next afternoon, as Elias was leading the two horses to the barn, he saw a rider approaching in the distance, fast and aggressive. It wasn't the sheriff, but one of Finch's flint-eyed hands, Jebediah. Elias immediately ran back inside. "Sarah, they know. Finch knows. We leave now." Sarah grabbed Silas, who was confused by the sudden flurry of movement. "Papa, what's wrong?" "Nothing, son. Just a quick trip. Adventure." Elias forced a cheerful lie. They rushed out to the barn, but Jebediah was closer than they thought, having taken a shortcut through the ravine. He arrived just as Elias was trying to mount Sarah and Silas on the faster horse. "Thorn, Finch wants a word with you about a missing lock and a book," Jebediah yelled, pulling his rifle from the scabbard. Elias shoved Sarah and Silas onto the horse. "Ride, Sarah. Don't stop. Head east to the old creek crossing." Elias jumped onto the second horse, drawing his own pistol. He fired a single warning shot into the air, hoping to scare Jebediah away. But the man was unperturbed, a professional enforcer. Jebediah returned fire, the bullet whistling past Elias's ear and hitting the barn wall with a thud. Elias realized the man wasn't aiming to wound. He was aiming to silence. Elias wheeled his horse around, creating a diversion. "Go, Sarah. Now." Sarah didn't hesitate. She dug her heels into the horse's flanks, clutching Silas tightly to her chest, and galloped away from the farm, away from the dust and the danger. Elias exchanged fire with Jebediah, trying to keep the pursuit focused on himself. The farm that was meant to be his sanctuary had become the stage for his final stand. He knew he couldn't outrun Jebediah, but he could buy Sarah and Silas time. He rode hard toward the south ravine, away from the main road, hoping to draw the confrontation into a rougher, less predictable terrain. Jebediah followed, his horse gaining ground steadily. The chase was brutal and chaotic. Elias felt a searing pain in his arm, a grazing shot from Jebediah's rifle. The blood instantly stained his sleeve. He ignored it, focusing on the rough path ahead. As he reached the edge of the ravine, Elias made a split-second decision. He threw himself from his horse, crashing hard into the brush, letting the animal run free toward the foothills. Jebediah, seeing the riderless horse, pulled up, convinced he had lost his target, or worse, that Elias had been gravely wounded and was hiding. Elias lay still, buried under a pile of dry leaves and thick brush, watching Jebediah scan the area, rifle raised. The enforcer, assuming Elias was either dead or incapacitated, dismounted and began searching the dense cover. Elias had one chance. As Jebediah moved past his hiding spot, Elias sprang out, tackling the man with a desperate surge of adrenaline. The struggle was short, vicious, and silent. Elias, driven by the memory of Silas's eyes and Sarah's terrified escape, fought with a savage, animalistic intensity. He managed to disarm Jebediah, the rifle clattering to the rocks. Jebediah, a seasoned fighter, managed to regain his footing, his eyes blazing with fury. "You just sealed your wife's fate, Thorn. You should have kept your mouth shut." Elias didn't respond with words. He fought with the primal need to protect the two people he had already betrayed and nearly lost. He subdued the man, not killing him, but binding him tightly with his own leather belt and a strip of torn cloth from his shirt. He left Jebediah hidden in the undergrowth, unconscious, with a clear message scrawled on a piece of paper and pinned to his vest. "The ledger is gone. Tell Finch." Exhausted, wounded, and without a horse, Elias began his trek on foot, following the approximate path Sarah had taken. He was no longer a farmer. He was a fugitive, the keeper of a terrible secret, running from a powerful, invisible enemy. He was injured, but he was alive, and the ledger was safe. His only hope was to reach Sarah and Silas before Finch mobilized a larger, more efficient force. The open Dakota plains, once a symbol of his freedom, now felt like a vast, exposed execution ground. Sarah rode east for hours. Silas huddled against her chest, the rhythmic pounding of the horse's hooves a desperate lullaby. She kept looking back, but the dust cloud from the farm eventually faded, and Elias did not follow. The agonizing realization that he was making a stand, buying them time, settled in her heart like a lump of cold iron. She knew, with chilling certainty, that she might never see her husband again. But the ledger, the proof of Finch's vile trade, was now their purpose, their salvation, and their only protection. She reached the old creek crossing, a small, sheltered copse of trees beside a shallow stream. She dismounted, her body aching, her mind racing. She had to conserve the horse's strength, and she had to be smart. Finch would not stop. He would send out trackers, or even worse, he would go to the sheriff and report a robbery, putting an official price on their heads. Silas, sensing the deep distress, reached up and touched her face with a small, trembling hand. "Mama, where are we going? Is Papa coming?" Sarah knelt, holding him close, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "Papa is following close behind, my love. We're going on a trip, a great adventure, to see a powerful man who is going to help us fix the land. It's a secret, Silas. You must be very brave, and you must trust Mama." She secured the horse and spent the night watching the trail, fear a constant humming tension beneath her skin. Meanwhile, back at the farm, Finch arrived with a detail of 3 men, having been alerted by the wounded and humiliated Jebediah. Finch found the farm deserted, the house in chaos from the rushed packing and the signs of a struggle near the ravine. Finch's rage was cold and methodical. He was not just angry about the ledger. He was furious that Elias Thorne, a desperate farmer he had mentally catalogued and dismissed, had outmaneuvered him and threatened the collective's operation. "They're on foot or riding one horse," Finch snapped, examining the tracks. "They won't get far. We split up. 2 of you follow the main trail east. Jebediah, you stay here. They might double back for supplies, or one might return for the other." Finch, however, had a deeper, more chilling plan. He took the remaining man, Silas Prentice, a former bounty hunter known for his relentless cunning, and rode toward Deadwood. Finch's plan was to set a trap using the one person he knew the Thorns would trust. He tracked down Martha Elkins, the nervous general store clerk, the one Sarah had spoken to. Finch had a keen memory for details. The following morning, Sarah, convinced she had put enough distance between them and Finch, decided to take a calculated risk. She needed food, a better map, and a disguise for Silas's injury that wouldn't draw attention. Deadwood was too dangerous. She headed for a small, isolated outpost, Tanner's Crossing, a trading post 20 miles north of Deadwood, accessible by a rough side trail. As she reached the crossing, a lone, familiar wagon was pulled up beside the post. It was Mr. Davison, an old, kind wagon driver who occasionally brought mail and supplies to the Thorne farm. "Mr. Davison," Sarah called out, relieved. "Thank God. We need your help. We're headed east to St. Louis. My husband is injured, and Silas needs a proper doctor." Davison's face was etched with concern. "Mrs. Thorne, I heard terrible news. A gang of robbers hit your farm. The sheriff is looking for them. Said they stole bank documents. They were trying to frame Mr. Finch." Sarah's heart sank. Finch had already spun the story. Davison leaned in conspiratorially. "Look, I know the sheriff is crooked. Finch paid me well, Mrs. Thorne. Paid me to bring you back." Sarah recoiled, her hand gripping Silas's shoulder. "Wait, Mrs. Thorne," Davison said, his face genuinely distressed. "Finch didn't ask me to hurt you. He asked me to bring you back to Martha Elkins. He said Martha has a letter from a doctor in St. Louis who can restore Silas's sight. Finch said the only way he'd give you the letter is if you agreed to return and clear his name. He showed me the letter. It looked official. It offered hope, Mrs. Thorne. Hope for the boy. The trap was brilliant and cruel. Finch wasn't using physical force. He was using Silas's injury, the deepest part of Sarah's pain, as bait. The chance, however remote, that Silas's sight could be recovered was an irresistible hook. Sarah looked at her blind, trusting son, and the agonizing decision hung in the balance. Return to Deadwood and face Finch, or continue to run and forever forfeit the chance of Silas seeing the world again. "Mama, can the doctor really fix my eyes?" Silas whispered, his small face uplifted, full of a desperate, innocent hope that tore Sarah's heart in two. Sarah knew it was a ruse, but the thought of denying her son even a false hope was unbearable. She had the ledger, she had the truth. She was now holding the high ground. She would confront Finch, trade the ledger for the name of the St. Louis doctor, and then use the papers to destroy him. It was a risk she had to take for Silas. "Yes, my love," Sarah said, a terrible resolve in her voice. "We're going back. We're going to get your eyes fixed." She made the exchange. She left the horse with Davison and secured a ride in his wagon, heading straight back towards Deadwood. Davison, under the pretense of escorting her, was, in fact, delivering her to Finch. As the wagon rumbled on, Sarah, holding the precious ledger-lined coat, looked down at her son. She knew the danger, but she was going to play Finch's game, and she was going to win. The hunter thought he had caught his prey, but Sarah was now walking into the lion's den, armed with the only weapon that could truly destroy him. The moment Sarah stepped into the dusty confines of the general store, she knew the air was charged with threat. It was late afternoon, and the store was deliberately empty, save for Horatio Finch and his grim-faced associate Silas Prentice. "Mr. Davison quickly excused himself, his face a picture of nervous guilt, leaving Sarah completely exposed. Finch stood behind the counter, a deceptively benign figure in his neat suit, his hands folded. He smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "Mrs. Thorne, so glad you returned. A mother's devotion, I always say, is the strongest force in the territory." Sarah held Silas tightly, her spine rigid with defiance. "I'm not here for platitudes, Finch. I'm here because you promised a letter. A doctor in St. Louis, I want it." "Of course, Mrs. Thorne. But first let's discuss the matter of the ledger," Finch purred, his eyes flicking to the lining of her coat. "And the false accusations your husband saw fit to spread." Sarah walked purposefully to the table in the center of the store, laying Silas gently on a cushioned bench. She unbuttoned Elias's coat and ripped the lining with a decisive tear, pulling out the ledger. She slammed it onto the table. "Here it is, Finch. Your entire inventory. Names, dates, and the specific annotation regarding my son." Sarah's voice was low and steady, radiating a fierce control. "This book proves you're not a banker. You're a dealer in human misery. If this information gets to the authorities east, the collective will sever all ties with you, and the territory will hang you." Finch's face did not waver, but his eyes narrowed with intense malice. "A bold play, Mrs. Thorne. And what does your husband get?" "He's already facing charges of assault on my man, Jebediah, and theft of bank documents. Elias gets full immunity. The land deed remains in our name, fully paid. And you give me the name and address of the doctor in St. Louis and a fully funded documented letter of introduction from Keller himself to secure Silas's treatment. In exchange, I destroy the ledger and all copies of the notes." Finch laughed, a short, dry, humorless sound. "You think I have Keller's letter?" "Keller is a ghost, Mrs. Thorne. He's already across the border. And your husband is a criminal. Why would I give you anything?" "Because you need your reputation, Finch," Sarah shot back, leaning over the table, her anger finally surfacing. "The collective needs a discreet supplier. If this ledger is published, your network is destroyed. I don't care about your wealth or your life, but I know the collective values silence above all else. I will not leave this room until I have the doctor's information." Finch stared at her, Genuinely taken aback by the farmer's wife's terrifying resolve. He had underestimated her, assuming she would break with grief or fear. He glanced at Prentice, who stood by the door, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "Prentice, lock the door," Finch commanded. The heavy bolt slid home, the sound echoing ominously. "Now let's stop this charade, Mrs. Thorne. You have no leverage. You're in my store, surrounded by my men. I will take the ledger, and you will be returned to the sheriff as an accomplice to your husband's crimes. The boy will be taken into protective custody. You will have nothing." Sarah didn't flinch. "I came prepared for that, Finch." She pulled a small glass vial from her skirt pocket, a familiar, clear fluid inside. "This is not venom, Finch. It's concentrated belladonna, deadly nightshade. It's quick, painless, and completely untraceable. I prepared 2 doses, one for Silas, one for myself. If you take 1 step toward me, if your man moves, I will administer it. You will have your ledger back, but you will also have 2 dead bodies in your store. A guaranteed scandal that will draw the territory's full attention, and the collective will know you failed to secure your operation." Finch's face finally cracked. The threat was real. Sarah's desperate resolve was written in the clear, steady hatred in her eyes. She was ready to commit the ultimate final act of a destroyed mother to ensure Finch's downfall. The sudden violent drama of a murder-suicide in his own store would be an unrecoverable blow to his discreet business. "No," Finch hissed, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Don't be foolish, Mrs. Thorne. Let's talk. I will give you the information, and your husband's charges will be dropped." He walked slowly to his desk, took out a pen, and scribbled an address on a small card. "Dr. Hawthorne, St. Louis Medical Institute. Hawthorne is Kellar's colleague. He knows the protocol. Tell him you were referred by the Dakota broker. He will understand. The immunity for your husband is yours, conditional on your immediate departure from the territory. Leave the farm. Leave Deadwood. And never return." Sarah studied the card, her eyes never leaving Finch's face. She believed the name was real. It was the only way Finch could truly buy her silence. "The ledger," Sarah said, holding it over a lit oil lamp on the counter. "The moment I am on the wagon heading east, the ledger is destroyed." "Agreed," Finch muttered, his defeat a visible sour taste in the air. As Prentice cautiously unlocked the door, Sarah gently woke Silas. "Come, my love. We're going to the big city doctor now." Just as Sarah was about to walk out, a noise from the back room, a muffled shout, drew Finch's attention. A man stumbled out, tied up and gagged, Jebediah having escaped Elias in the ravine and returned to the store for help. "Finch, the husband is still alive. He was in the ravine. He's coming back for them," Jebediah yelled, spitting out his gag. The new revelation threw the entire, fragile negotiation into immediate chaos. Elias was coming. The deal was off. Finch lunged for Sarah, his calm facade dissolving into pure, panicked violence. Finch lunged, but Sarah reacted instantly, grabbing Silas and scrambling back, pushing the table violently into Finch's path. The oil lamp toppled, spilling oil onto the open pages of the ledger. "Prentice, stop her!" Finch shrieked, struggling to untangle himself from the table. Prentice, the seasoned bounty hunter, moved fast, drawing his pistol. But Sarah, driven by a primal surge of protective force, was quicker. She didn't hesitate. She threw the still-burning oil lamp onto the ledger. The paper instantly ignited, a bright, terrifying flare of orange light. The damning evidence, the only leverage she had, was turning to ash. "The ledger is burning, Finch. You get nothing now," Sarah screamed, grabbing Silas and running for the open door, propelled by the sudden distraction and the blinding flash of the fire. Prentice hesitated for a split second, weighing the order to stop Sarah against the imperative to save the documents that protected the collective. He aimed his pistol at the fire instead, shooting the flames to try and extinguish them, wasting precious time. Sarah ran out into the twilight street, clutching Silas. Deadwood was quiet, the residents inside for dinner, and her desperate flight was momentarily unseen. Just as she reached the corner, a figure emerged from the shadows of the saloon. It was Elias. Wounded, exhausted and covered in trail dust, he had followed her tracks back to Deadwood, arriving just in time to see the light of the fire and hear the commotion. "Sarah!" he yelled, running toward her. "Elias! Go! Go! St. Louis! The doctor!" Sarah shoved the card with Dr. Hawthorne's address into his hand. "Finch knows we have the ledger. It's burning. We have to get out now." Finch and Prentice burst out of the store, coughing from the smoke, their faces contorted with rage. Finch saw Elias and Sarah together, and his focus narrowed. "They're together. Get them. Kill the husband. Take the boy and the woman," Finch yelled. The ensuing chase was a desperate street-level struggle for survival. Elias, despite his wound, moved with a surprising agility, using the crowded alleyways and back streets of Deadwood as cover. He pulled Sarah and Silas into a dark, narrow passage behind the dry goods store. "The stables. We need a horse," Elias gasped, clutching his bleeding arm. They made it to the abandoned smithy, the same place where Elias had committed his unspeakable act. The irony was a cold dagger in his heart. They needed to cut through the yard to reach the main stables. As they reached the rear of the smithy, Prentice appeared at the end of the alley, his gun raised. "Stop, or I shoot the boy." Elias shoved Sarah and Silas behind a stack of old barrels. "Go, Sarah. Keep running. Find the horses." Elias stepped out from behind the barrels, using his injured arm to brace himself. He knew he couldn't beat Prentice in a gunfight. He had to distract him. "You won't get away with it, Prentice. The collective will disown Finch for this mess. You'll all hang," Elias taunted, desperately trying to keep the focus on himself. Prentice didn't flinch. "I only follow orders, Thorne, and the order is to clean up Finch's mess, starting with you." Prentice fired. The bullet struck the barrel where Elias had been hiding, splitting the wood. Elias rolled out of the way, grabbing a piece of broken lumber and throwing it at the gunman, a desperate, futile gesture. Suddenly, a massive, muscular man appeared from the shadows near the stable. It was Jebediah, who had recovered and cut them off at the exit. They were trapped between two killers. Sarah, hiding with Silas, realized the horrifying truth. Elias was not going to make it. She had to ensure Silas's survival and the information's safety. She could not afford to mourn. "Elias, the map!" Sarah screamed, pulling the small address card from her pocket and pinning it to Silas's inner coat lining. "The East Road. Use the old mining trail. Go. I'll catch up." Elias understood. He was the diversion. Silas was the priority. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, he charged Prentice, throwing himself at the man in a suicidal attempt to disrupt his aim. "Go, Silas." "Run!" Elias roared. Sarah pushed the blind boy forward. "Go, Silas. Feel the wall. Follow the wall. Don't stop. Don't look back. Mama will find you." Silas, terrified but obeying the primal authority in his mother's voice, began to run blindly, his small hands sweeping the rough stone wall of the stable for guidance, running into the darkness of the East Road. The sound of the struggle behind Sarah was muffled, brutal, and sickeningly final. She didn't look back. She ran into the stable, her mind focused entirely on a single goal, securing a horse. She found a lean, quick mare and hastily threw a saddle on it. She rode out, just as Finch, having caught up, emerged from the alley, staring in fury at the sight of the stable door swinging open. Prentice and Jebediah had subdued Elias, and the fight was over. Elias was down, but the boy and the wife were gone. Finch saw Sarah riding away, and his rage boiled over. "The wife! Get her! She has the boy!" "The money's on the wife." Sarah rode hard, pushing the mare to its limits, the terrifying sounds of Deadwood fading behind her. She did not know if Elias was alive or dead. She did not know if Silas was safe, running blindly in the dark. All she had was the small card with the St. Louis doctor's name, the ashes of the ledger, and a fierce burning need for vengeance and her son's recovery. She was no longer running for the farm. She was running for the truth and the chance to save her son, not just physically, but spiritually. Sarah rode east for 2 days, pushing the mare until its flanks were foam-flecked, stopping only for brief, panicked moments to rest and ask about a small, blind boy traveling alone. Every person she asked remembered him, a small boy, clearly lost and disoriented, but moving with a desperate, singular focus, guided by his fear and his mother's command. The boy was alive, moving toward her, somehow guided by the invisible thread of their connection. On the third morning, near an abandoned water tower 20 miles from the small settlement of Ridge Pass, she found him. Silas was huddled under a canvas tarp, exhausted, his face covered in dirt, clutching his whittled horse. "Mama," he cried, recognizing her scent and the sound of her breath, throwing himself into her arms. "Oh, my love," Sarah sobbed, holding him, her own fear finally releasing in a flood of relief. "I kept going, Mama. I didn't stop. Is Papa coming?" Sarah pressed her face into his hair, unable to speak the terrible truth. Elias was gone. She had seen the way Finch and his men operated. Elias had bought them their freedom with his life. She gently wiped his face. "Papa is very proud of you, Silas. He took a long trip to St. Louis already. He's setting things up for your eyes. Now we have to hurry and catch him." The lie was necessary, a temporary shield against a truth too devastating for a blind 7-year-old to bear. Sarah continued their journey east, changing their name to Mrs. Ellen and Master James, and selling the horse for passage on a series of small anonymous wagons. She secured a train ticket from Omaha to St. Louis, funding the trip with the remaining cash from Keller's curse. The suspense of the chase was over, replaced by the quiet, internal tension of a desperate journey. Sarah knew Finch would assume she had been silenced, the ledger destroyed, the trail cold. Weeks later, they arrived in the sprawling, bustling city of St. Louis. It was a different world from Deadwood, a place of sophistication and towering brick buildings. Sarah, a simple farm wife, felt utterly out of place, but the card in her coat lining gave her purpose. She found the St. Louis Medical Institute, an imposing, white-columned structure. She walked Silas to the reception desk, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and paralyzing doubt. She handed the card to the stern receptionist. "I need to see Dr. Hawthorne. I was referred by the Dakota broker regarding a special patient." The receptionist's demeanor instantly changed from indifferent to intensely deferential. "Wait here, madam. The doctor will see you immediately." They were ushered into a private, wood-paneled office. Dr. Hawthorne was a severe, older man, wearing thick glasses, his attire impeccably tailored. He looked nothing like the rough-and-ready Dr. Keller, but his eyes held the same cold, calculating intelligence. "Mrs. Thorne," Dr. Hawthorne said, his voice clipped and precise. "I'm familiar with the case. Keller was very successful. The broker reported the transfer was complete. Will you do it, doctor?" Sarah pleaded, clutching Silas's hand. "Can you restore his sight? We were told you know the procedure." Dr. Hawthorne leaned back, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Mrs. Thorne, there is a terrible misunderstanding. I cannot restore his sight. That's not what Keller was paid for. Keller's service was a highly specialized, very risky extraction for my research. The eyes your son possessed were invaluable to a complex new procedure. I did not purchase them to restore them." Sarah felt the floor fall out from under her. Elias's ultimate sacrifice, her terrifying confrontation with Finch, the whole treacherous journey. It had all been for nothing. There was no cure. There was only the permanent, horrific consequence of the initial crime. "No," Sarah whispered, the single word filled with the sound of pure, shattered despair. "Finch promised. Finch is a ruthless broker, Mrs. Thorne. Hawthorne interrupted dismissively. He sold you a lie to protect his inventory. Silas's eyes are gone, integrated into a study that will help thousands of others. The procedure is irreversible. The tragedy is complete. The silence was the deepest terror. Sarah looked at Silas, who was listening intently, his bandaged eyes turned toward her voice. The truth, stark and brutal, settled over her. Elias was dead for a lie. Her son would remain blind. The farm was safe, but the family was destroyed, purchased with a currency of permanent loss. Sarah stood, her body trembling, but her mind now completely clear. The hope was gone, replaced by a cold, burning resolve. She had one thing left to do. "Thank you for your honesty, Doctor," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a public engagement." Dr. Hawthorne looked confused. Public engagement? Sarah led Silas out of the office and down the Institute's grand hallway. She stopped at the end of the hall, where a massive portrait of the Institute's founder hung. She looked at Silas. "Silas, you know how Papa was a brave man who fought for the truth?" "Yes, Mama." "Well, Papa is still fighting for the truth, and we are going to help him. Remember that big book he carried, the one that burned?" "Yes." "I memorized the names, Silas, all the names of the people Finch marked for sale. We are going to find a newspaper, a big, honest newspaper. And we are going to tell them everything, every name, every transaction. We will expose Finch and the collective. We may have lost the land, and we have lost your father, but we will save the others." Sarah led her blind son out of the St. Louis Medical Institute, not as a victim, but as a witness. She had failed to save her husband and her son's sight, but she had saved the truth. The farm was a curse, but the truth was their only terrible salvation. The terrifying reality of the dark, organized trade would finally come to light, brought down by a desperate mother and the memory of a father's sacrifice. Their new life would be a relentless pursuit of justice, a continuous, exhausting campaign against the powerful darkness that lurked beneath the polite surface of civilization. The journey was over, but the reckoning was just beginning.